a.m. It's 10 a.m. I'm signaling we got to go.
Good Monday morning, everyone. We are so excited to be here this Monday morning on Author Talk. So you guys know me, Amy, here with Russell Fern. Our lovely guest today is Sebastien. And let me just say, I had a crazy weekend. I actually took, well, I mean, I take a Friday off, but I took the weekend off and I went to Lake Travis with my kids, Josh and my in-laws, and we went and just rented a boat, and the kids had so much fun. Sky was like full on Titanic at the front of the boat, just like wee the whole time. My little 2-year-old, she had so much fun. She crashed out on the boat for about 2.5 hours, just loving it, having so much fun. My youngest got on the tube, and so it was so much fun. And you guys will be so happy to hear I got my car back with AC, you guys. So it was great. So
Sebastien, listen about this car. She made her husband sell a motorcycle.
I did not. He did not sell a motorcycle.
He sold one of them, sell a motorcycle that he had cherished, and he was going to build up in this beautiful thing, and instead she made him sell it so she could have an SUV.
I did not. He did not sell his bike, Sebastien. These are lies. He did not sell his motorcycle. He still has one. He has
and then karma broke it right away.
Well, I'm confused because I thought you lived in Texas, and my understanding was that forcing someone to sell their motorcycle in Texas was a capital crime. Rusty, I think you said you're an attorney, so maybe you could clarify the law.
Yes, and I say this out of bitterness because my wife made me sell my Harley so she could paint the house.
Russell, you are so bad. He still has the motorcycle.
Demasculating everywhere. Good morning, Greg.
He still has a motorcycle, okay? And I didn't force him to buy it. I just strongly encouraged it, Russell. What did you do?
So you still allow him to have one motorcycle?
Yeah, he still has one.
Yeah, I have to say, Sebastien, I think you're right about the law in Texas because, there are weird laws in Texas.
I think they're very manageable.
Russell, what did you do this weekend? That's what I want to know.
I have to get on what usually is Fern's lecture box and say, the thing I ran across this weekend, which was rather shocking, a 64-year-old man posted on Facebook that he felt because he was 64 that his life was over. And I thought, well, he'll have comments supporting him and that sort of thing. And he had lots of comments that were like, I completely understand. And I was really shocked. I'm 64, almost 65. And I believe in the philosophy of reinvigorating your life so that the passage of time does not slip by. And the way I do that is by massively disrupting my life and doing something completely new. And if some of our viewers feel that way, I encourage them to step out and disrupt that which has them too comfortable and reinvigorate themselves. It certainly has done it for me.
What's interesting about that? Sorry to jump in, but when you sort of talk about reinvigorating and being of a certain age, something I learned a while back is that when I was in my 20s, I kind of wished I was in my teens again. When I was in my 30s, I wished I was in my 20s. So when I was in my 20s, I was like, this isn't that great. I kind of wish I was younger, starting out again. And when I was in my 30s, I was like, oh no, I wish I was in my 20s. And and then you're in your 40s, you kind of wish you were in your 30s. You're like, if I could just. And so I realized something like the Stoics. The Stoic philosophers have this thing about death because when the Stoics were around, death was the thing everybody kind of understood as the thing that we fear. But like nowadays, we often fear death less than we fear like kind of being old or being infirm and things like that. And the Stoic solution to death was you had to imagine your own death every day so that you would kind of get over it a little bit. And so what I do now, I'm 54, and when I sometimes and I still have those thoughts. Oh man, if I was 44, like that'd be really great right now, right? And so what I realized I have to do is go, No. I get up and I go, I'm 64 years old, which is, still a great age, of course. So that when I'm 50, so that when I go, no, I'm 54, I can appreciate like where I am now, because, otherwise we kind of constantly live our lives like just wishing we could go back to a time where we wished we could go back to a time where we wished we could go back further. So I don't know. That's kind of the thing for me.
I plan to live to be 100 at least, because I want to be able to say I lived a century. Because I plan to do my 50th birthday not as like a 50th birthday, but more like a celebration of a half a century, because I think it just sounds so much better. Like,
I had a birthday like that for my wife, and she didn't really appreciate it. You're half a century old. She didn't think that was a good birthday. Think it was
great. Russell, you don't point it out. You just are like, yay! You don't just tell her those things. Like, no, just don't. Josh did that to me. Told me I was like a quarter century or something on that birthday. And I'm pretty sure if looks could kill, he would have dropped dead. Okay? I'm just saying, Russell. No, we don't do that. We don't do that.
Yeah. Sebastien, we are rated, to our surprise, in the top 10 independent book podcast in America. And we're rather shocked about it. More people listen to us during the week on the podcast than watch us in our show on Monday mornings. And we really appreciate those people. Amy, how do people find us?
Yeah, so you can find us anywhere that you can listen to podcasts. Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play. Anywhere that you can find a podcast is where we are. But if you also want to watch us, because we have been doing this for a really long time, and I have to cross my hands because I'm very animated and talk with my hands, you can join us over on our Facebook group, YouTube channel, or on any one of our profiles. So that way you can see our gorgeous faces and our animated, like when Russell was talking about being half a century, you can see mine and Fern's mouth completely drop. Okay. So I'm just saying it's fun to watch us and to listen to us, but we are so grateful for all of you guys. It has been a fun 6 years, and we are so excited to see how long we just continue going. It's been so much fun. And like Russell said, we are just shocked you guys listen. We started this for fun because we love authors and writers, and it's turned into what it is. And we are so grateful because that is because of you guys. Speaking of authors and writers and everything, tonight on Through the Eyes of Authors, we're kind of shifting gears a little bit. We're talking about pirating books, how it happens, things to look for to avoid, and the fact that pirating books has become a huge issue for authors, especially self-published or small press authors. It's become a big deal. And so we're going to get some information from Danica Bloom this evening on Through the Eyes of Authors at 7 p.m. Central. You're not going to want to miss that. We're working on doing a copyright panel, which will be so much fun because I would love to learn more about copywriting just in general. So Sebastien, I didn't give you this disclaimer. I am not a writer. I work with authors. I love authors. I live through them, but I am the only one on this podcast that has never written a book. But I claim to have played a role in everyone's book. So
yes,
Sebastien, I noticed
a book yet.
Right.
Sebastien, I noticed that you are on Amazon UK.
I am on Amazon, I think all the Amazons, except the actual Amazon.
The reason I noticed that is Fern got a 5-star rating. Where did you get that, Fern?
Well, Doctor Who Online.
Yeah, Doctor Who Online gave her a 5-star rating on her fantasy book. It was a big deal that we continue to celebrate on her last book. And so I noticed that. And Fern, I hope we're going to get into his webpage. Authors that are watching or listening to this should go to Sebastian's webpage. It's unique. It's interesting. It gives a little glimpse into who he really is. It's different than most author web pages, including mine. And as I'm reading it, I'm thinking, I've got to redo mine before my next book comes out because it's excellent. Good job.
Thanks, Russell. I spent a long time kind of working on that. I used to do a little bit of interaction design and interface design back in the day when those things kind of mattered, or were a little more fun and experimental. And yeah, I spent a long time trying to kind of go like, what I mean, just as a simple piece of advice for any authors sort of going, well, what do I do with my website? Is the first thing you just want to think about, regardless of the platform, the technology, whatever template you might buy or get designed. You basically just want to think in terms of information flow. Why did somebody come to your website in the first place? For almost all of us, it's because they've already read our book. So what are they there to find? First thing they want to see is what's your next book. Second thing they want to see is just a hair about who you are, not a giant bunch of pages and photos, but just something. Next thing they want to see is kind of like what you want them to do, like what's the call to action. For most of us, it's, hey, sign up for my newsletter or something like that. So just, if people just think in terms of information flow, like this kind of, somebody's come, what do they want to know? If you think about what it's like when someone comes up to you to talk to you about your book and what they ask you, oh, what's your book? Oh, what other books do you have? Oh, so how did you get started? And then, oh, like, how could I follow you? What else do you do? And if you just sort of think in terms of that, you can usually find something pretty good. And then you let the content, the books, the photos speak for themselves after that.
Yeah. And, one of the things that Amy did with her program was do a 7-part series on like creating that author platform. The website was part of it. And then, using your newsletter, how you use your newsletter, to keep your readers engaged, and doing some newsletter swaps with other authors to build up your database, and just a whole bunch of things. Because, one of the things that we're very passionate about is helping authors be more successful. And the branding, your website, is one of the most important parts of your success. It's, their first impression of you many times. So it's really cool to see. We should pull up his website now that we're on it, now that we've been talking about it, and people are like, what does this magnificent thing look like? Right.
I got it.
So yeah. Sebastien, the book that we're going to be talking to you about today, I was reading about it, and it's like an origin story, right? Tell me a little bit about like the series that it's with, because I see on your website you have a lot of different like series.
I actually have 3 series, 2 of which are kind of connected, and then a new series starting in the new year. So the thing I'm probably most known for is The Greatcoats, which is swashbuckling fantasy. It's a swashbuckling fantasy series for adults about an order of traveling magistrates who often have to, settle their cases with steel, as it were. So there's a lot of dueling, a lot of swashbuckling, a lot of the sort of sensibility of, the old Errol Flynn movies, or Scaramouche for people that know Raphael Sabatini. Most people know the Three Musketeers, of course, and also things like The Princess Bride. So there's a lot of that spirit in there, in that world. And I also write I write some short stories in that world, so that you can sort of see other parts of it. Because when you're writing like a big fantasy series, you're really usually kind of following through one set of important events in that world. And so I released a book in December called Tales of the Greatcoats, which is, a bunch of short stories set in that world. So that's always a lot of fun. The other series that I'm known for is called Spellslinger, and it's a young adult fantasy series. It's full of magic and like 15 different magic systems, and lots of conflict, and all the things that we deal with when we're teenagers, and sometimes when we're adults, but sort of translated into that kind of magical adventure, and the sort of the threats that come out of that. And one of the characters, when I was first writing Spellslinger, which is about this young guy, he's 16 years old. He's almost the reverse Harry Potter. He lives in a very magical society. His parents are the most renowned sort of mages in his society. His younger sister is like the most promising mage, and he's about to go through his mage's trials, and his magic starts to fade away. And on the surface, most people think that's going to end up being a book about how this guy goes and finds his powers, and they're the most magnificent powers of all. But that was not my experience as a teenager. I did not find when I felt that I wasn't special and other people were better than me, I didn't find that I suddenly got better and more interesting and more attractive than everybody else. So it's he meets someone along the way. He meets this woman called Farius Parfax, who is what's called an Argosi, and the Argosi are kind of these wandering gambler kind of cowboy philosophers. And they don't, and Farius doesn't have magic, and she doesn't respect magic particularly. She doesn't think much of people who like to use power in order to have, you know, influence and power over other people. And she sort of tries to show him this other path. And so the Spellslinger series is a lot about Kellen, the protagonist, kind of learning the Argosi ways and, you know, learning how these guys survive in a world with magic and militaries and all these threats. And the thing I loved about writing those books, especially because there is so much magic involved, is that what the Argosi have isn't magic. What they do is they take very human talents like eloquence and perceptiveness and resilience, and they just kind of master those to a degree where they're almost magical. You know, they learn to kind of hear other people and listen and realize what people are really saying. And so that's how they kind of navigate their way through the world. And so when that's a 6 series, that's 6 books in that series. And when that cycle was completed, I'd actually had an 8-book deal with my publishers. And when it was so funny because when that deal was offered to me, it was literally, it was just like that. And like at first it was 4 books because we were pitching 3 books in a series, my agent and I, and then one publisher said, well, we'll buy 4 books because everybody liked quartets at the time. And then the publisher I'm with said, you know, was sort of bidding back and forth a little bit. And they said, no, we'll take 8 books. And so they signed me for 8 books, but then they really only wanted 6 in the series because, you know, it starts to get a little unwieldy. And a lot of the ways that a lot of people don't know this, but in traditional publishing, a lot of the ways in which publishers kind of recoup costs now is that they buy world rights and then they sell the translations. And in fact, the Great Coats, before Trader's Blade came out, my first book, I had already earned out on the series. In other words, and that was because they'd sold foreign rights. The Germans bought it, Canadians, Canada, my home country bought it, and Penguin. And then, you know, the French bought some books and it kind of went like that. And so with Spellslinger, it was an 8-book deal, but they wanted 6 books. And then we were like, okay, well, what do you want with the last 2 books? And they were sort of like, I don't know, what do you want to do? You know, we don't want to constrain your artistic genius, you know, like it has to be what you want. So I pitched them on this sci-fi idea I had that I really loved about a group of teenagers who were on a kind of a diplomatic ship that gets overtaken, and then all the kind of the adults who are running it are imprisoned or dead, and there's only these sort of the only adults left are kind of these merchants and diplomats, and then these teenagers kind of have to take over because they're the only ones that kind of understand how the ship works. They're not, you know. So I love that idea. My publisher's like, yeah, that's a great idea. You should do that one day, but not here. Another idea that I was like, oh, here's a great idea about kind of a mystery school for teenagers. It's like Hogwarts, but it's actually for detectives. And they're like, oh, that's great. You should do that somewhere else. And I said, how about if I do 2 more books set in the Spellslinger world, but not Spellslinger? Like, oh, you should follow your artistic vision. Yes.
That is awesome.
That's a great story.
That is awesome.
That is a great story.
Go ahead.
It took you a while to get to what they were really telling you, right?
Yes.
One thing that's lovely about British publishers. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Fern. I didn't remember.
Well, I was going to say, one of the things that struck me as you were describing the series is that the idea of, you know, the non-exceptional and yet exceptional character. You know, what a great way for young people, you know, what a great message for young people is like, you don't have to have some kind of special power. You don't have to be super special. You can just use the talents that you do have and hone them. And you can become whatever you want. You're honing your skills and your talents. And I think that's such a powerful message, you know, in your series. And I just wanted to say, I love it. I love that message. So in these next 2 books Go ahead.
Oh, could I just say one thing about that? Because you hit the nail on the head. You hit like the thing that's, I think it's, it's so funny because we were talking earlier before the show a little bit about aging, and I'm 54, and I'm like, it's taken me this long to kind of find kind of the secret to my life, so to speak, which is like, I love the idea of magic and being kind of exceptional, but I'm not. I have no magic and I'm not exceptional. And exactly what you said, like the kind of the secret has been, including for being a writer, right? Because I wasn't the 6-year-old who wrote their first novel, or the 12-year-old, or the 16. I didn't start writing until I was in a rock band and I was getting sued by the bass player, and I had nothing and no prospects, and went to the library and found a box of book tapes that said, called Let's Write a Mystery, and went, I don't know, I guess I'll try that. But the key, the essence of Spellslinger and kind of what it's kind of taught me writing it is, yeah, you probably don't have the one thing that you're just the greatest at in the world. And so your job, just like when people cast a magic spell, they have to put together all the exact right, ingredients, is that you have to take all those interesting bits of yourself and go, what's the magic spell I can cast with these particular pieces, right?
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't the world's greatest fencer by any stretch of the imagination when I was fencing. I wasn't necessarily the world's greatest plotter or the world's greatest, I don't have a law degree like Russell does. But I know a lot about all these different kind of pieces, and I'm really quite good at like kind of clever banter and stuff like that. And if I put those all together, that becomes the magic spell that produced my first published novel, Trader's Blade, and got me the 4-book deal, and then got me an 8-book deal, that then got me another 4-book deal, that then got me 2 more 1-book deals, right? So yeah, that's the key. What you described, Fern, is really what it's all about for me.
Yeah. And I think that's like the human journey, right? I mean, you're describing the human journey to figure out what it is you're here to do. What are all the pieces of talent that you have? And how do you put them together in service of others, right? And also for you to be able to enjoy your life and to feel a purpose and be fulfilled. So I'm always curious, because I'm a fantasy sci-fi writer. So I'm always curious as to how a world is born, right? What birthed this world? What was it that made you go, okay, I think to begin building this world of this novel, and also your previous one, because you've got the 2 separate worlds, which is really cool, right? To be able to have the 2 separate worlds. How were they born? What was the spark?
So the Greatcoats, which is the swashbuckling fantasy series, came from, and this is the wonder. Like I think if I had a purpose in life, or for my own life, I'm always looking to kind of re-enchant like my world, and then if possible, re-enchant somebody else's world. And the thing I love about writing is sometimes it's so bizarre where the pieces come from that you can kind of that it feels like it's magical. So for example, in the case of the Greatcoats, so part of it is, so one of the reasons why readers tend to love the Greatcoats is it's about these traveling magistrates who have to sword fight to enforce their verdicts sometimes. And they're known, they're called the Greatcoats because of the coats that they wear, the mantle of office, which are these long leather coats with slender bone plates inside that kind of protect them from almost like armor. And they have all these tricks and traps sort of in the pockets and all this stuff. And they can literally just kind of go out in the world just wearing their coat and kind of survive almost anything. They could survive in the wilderness, and they could survive in a duel in a city. They can, they've got everything they need with them. And I kind of love that idea. Well, that idea came from the fact that my older brother, one day bought me a greatcoat, just a long gray kind of wool coat. And I thought, wow, what a stupid present this is. Like, this isn't something I would ever want to wear. But then I was working as an independent actor. I'm proud to say the world's 3rd worst semi-professional independent actor ever to cross the stage. But I was doing these little indie films, and there was always a lot of like kind of, I don't know, well, because indie films that want to survive and often shoot at night, because first of all, it's kind of cheaper to get locations at night. It's harder to it's actually easier to light for the most part because you got sort of control. But it gets kind of cold when you're standing there and you don't know what to do, and you don't have a trailer. And so I would bring my coat because it had all these pockets inside of it. And so I could have like my phone and a book and 3 bananas and, like heating pads and anything I kind of wanted. And I went, oh, that's really cool. And then at the same time, I came across this reference. I was reading some history, and I came across this reference about what were called in England in the 12th century, the justices itinerant. And that's because back before you had the kind of courts we have today, and I apologize, Russell, if I'm describing things you know far better than I do, but especially in England, there wasn't a place, you didn't have like a system of adjudicating the law in every single tiny town. For the most part, the laws are adjudicated by the king at the king's court, which is why the term court is used for a court of justice. And so because the king, can't travel all around the country and doesn't want to open courts, they would have these justices itinerant who would go out and they go on a circuit. They go on a circuit, all the little towns, and they hear whatever cases. So if your cow ate some other cow's grass, you sometimes have to wait 6 months for a judge to hear your case. And that's where we get the term circuit court originally, right? Yep. Which is also true in the United States. And so I was like, oh, well, this is so cool. What if it was like that? Imagine being one of those judges and the king's like, okay, go on your circuit and you got to go hear these things. And you show up in a town and there's like a local lord or there's a local, people of power, and you go in to hear a case and you kind of judge it on the merits. And turns out that you've just irritated the most, the powerful people, and you're just kind of on your own. And I was like, oh, maybe they'd have to sometimes fight their way out of that. And so that was it. And then the dramatic essence of the Greatcoats of that world, which is where it's a world in which the Greatcoats tried to be these heroic people who kind of brought the law to the common folk. Ended up the king was deposed by the dukes and executed, and the Greatcoats were branded as traitors, and everybody hates them. Like even the common folk they try to serve view them as crap. And that came because in the 2004 American election, being Canadian, I'm a big fan of American politics because our politics is entirely too reasonable.
Yeah, we keep things fun.
I was watching John Kerry. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Your politics is fun when you're not affected by it. That's the joy. Yeah,
that's so very true. Very true.
But I was watching the stuff that happened with John Kerry when he was running for his for the presidency, and regardless of how one feels about John Kerry, I'm not taking a position necessarily. But it was here was a guy who did not like Vietnam, volunteered for the Vietnam War, got decorated, and all the kind of things in the world. Regardless how one feels about George W. Bush, and I don't have any resentment towards the guy. He was in the Texas National Guard and probably didn't have to go into that level of danger, and yet somehow John Kerry, became like the swift-boated guy, became like he's actually a liar and he's a traitor. He was a coward, and all of this kind of stuff happened. And I was like, holy crap, how do you do that? How do you suddenly turn that over? And that became the essence for the Greatcoats. So you take those little pieces that have a coat my brother bought me, an obscure reference to 12th century English justices, and a political event that kind of bugged me in my soul. And then you put them together, and that's how you kind of start to create a world.
I love that. I love that. And now your brother can be like, see, my presents are awesome.
Oh, hey, the number of times my brother has suggested that without that coat, I don't have a career, and therefore I owe him financial recompense.
Yeah, I figured so because, brothers, that's how siblings are, man. They're terrible. They take credit for everything and then they annoy you. So
I'm glad it's not just my brothers then, because I really thought they were exceptional in that regard.
No, I think it's just a sibling thing. I think, because my brother is just as annoying. I mean, he came to me and was like, you should write something that's socially relevant. And I'm like, how would you even know? You haven't read my book, So anyway, brothers.
You know how we were saying that in Texas, it's against the law for a woman to make her husband sell his beloved motorcycle. Okay, when we become rulers of the world, first law is going to be it's capital offense to tell a writer what to write.
Oh, yes. Oh,
That's
yes.
got to be the
I
first
agree.
rule.
I agree. Oh my gosh, because they do that all the time. People are like, "Oh, you're a writer? Oh, I have a story." It's like, "No, thank you. I have
Yeah.
plenty of worlds in my own head. I don't need yours."
Well,
It's
or even just, you know, oh, you shouldn't be writing about this. You should, you know, you should be writing about this. This is way more important. You have an obligation to write about this. And I'm always like, my thing is not that people's ideas or their social interests aren't valid. It's that I think people don't understand, certainly me as a writer, I am only good enough to do a good job writing the things that are so central to me that, like, that's what I can write. I don't write a particular kind of character. Like, I don't write Farius in the Way of the Argosi, which is the first of the two origins stories that we were talking about earlier from Spellslinger. I don't write her as the kind of person she is because I sat down and went, oh, this is a really tactical or smart strategic move. This will suit this market, or this will suit this political moment. Eric is like, that's the only way I know how to do it. And if I try to write even 5 degrees closer to somebody else's vision, I will suck at it. So, you know, if I were a better writer, sure, I would take people's advice all the time, but I'm not.
And here's the thing, like, I mean, look at your series. Your series has a great message. But even let's say it didn't. Let's say that it was just a really fun read and that was all its purpose. That is 100% a wonderful purpose, because we all know that the world is a dark and foreboding place, especially if you're in the United States. But right now, but we all need those escape moments, right? We all go to see those fluff movies. We all enjoy. And so there's, you know, it's always interesting to me how, you know, the people who are literary writers, you know, they kind of look down on genre writers and stuff. It's like, no, you know, we all write to an audience, and, you know, sometimes it's going to be, you know, world shattering for someone, and sometimes it's just going to be fun. It's just going to take them to another world where they can just enjoy themselves, and that's a really good reason to do it. And plus, I mean, we have fun, right? I'm assuming you just have fun making these things up, because I do.
I sometimes do. I'm always happy when they're done. But the journey through them is always its own adventure, and adventures aren't all about rainbows and unicorns. And writing adventures are no different.
See, Fern and I have had disagreements about that very subject many times, because I feel more like you, Sebastian. Once I'm in a book, I bleed that book. I live the book, and I'm bleeding it, and I'm suffering from it. And I may have a great writing day, and then the next morning I wake up and realize that was terrible. And so I much more identify with what you have to say.
You know how people...
Well, there are definitely painful parts. There's definitely painful moments as you're writing through it.
Well, you know, it's funny because, you know, in our business, people constantly talk about writers as either being plotters or pantsers. You know, plotters or pantsers. Either you plot everything out in advance, and I see Fern has what looks like a giant master plan for a political coup in her background, but maybe that's a book. Let's hope that it's a book. I don't see any bomb-making plans behind
It's
her.
It's a book.
And you know, I just wrote been writing a massive outline, the longest outline I've ever written, even though it's not for a very long book. But then I have other books where I wrote with no outline whatsoever, and things like that. And some people, you know, people will sort of talk about a process, and I don't have one. Mine shifts with every book, because what I am, I think, is not a plotter or a pantser. I'm a prospector. I'm going digging for gold. Right. And I'm digging in the minds of my own horrible subconscious. And sometimes your subconscious spits up a brilliant idea, you know, right off the bat, and you just kind of feel this flow coming out. And sometimes your subconscious spits up whatever last, you know, crappy TV episode you watched, and or whatever other book you wish you'd written, and you're just digging and digging and finding nothing. Right. And so that's what it always feels like to me. I'm just digging in the minds. I'm looking for stuff. And sometimes I find something and I'm like, oh man, this is great. And sometimes I keep digging, I find nothing. And I have to go, you know what? This tunnel is empty. I've gone, you know, there's nothing here. And I have to go to a different route, a different tunnel. And that applies to process. Sometimes I'm just sitting there going, I'm going to get up first thing tomorrow morning. I'm going to get out, I'll get on the computer. I'm just going to start writing. I'm going to let my muse flow, right? And sometimes it sort of will. But then other times I go, the veins tapped out. There's nothing there. And I can just keep going back to the keyboard every single day as long as I want, and it'll still be tapped out. And so then I go, okay, I have to look somewhere else. So sometimes okay, why don't I try plotting? Why don't I try doing some research? For me, sometimes it's going for runs and listening to music. I have this because I'm a terrible runner. And for some reason, when I listen to music, when I run, sometimes I get emotional. So like if I have an idea, I'll have an idea and I'll go, oh, that's kind of clever. And then it moves on. And sometimes a song will spark an idea, and I'll keep repeating the song while I pursue the idea as I'm running. And then sometimes I'll go, oh, that idea feels like something. And I know it feels like something because I start crying, which is weird when you're running. People are like, what is it? Is he crying because he runs so slowly and badly? Is that because I understand that? But yeah, a lot of Trader's Blade, like almost every major part of that book, that first book that launched my career, those were all scenes that came up in my head as I was running, and I'd go, I just started crying. Okay, that's important. And so, yeah, so it's prospecting, and prospecting, which thankfully I've never had to do in real life, is incredibly hard, and it can be incredibly frustrating. The rewards can be amazing, or you can just spend years going nowhere. So I don't know what it's like for you, Russell. That's what it feels like for me.
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned that there is more to writing than just sitting down and writing, because many times people think that their writing time has to be at the keyboard or, getting the ideas on pen paper. But oftentimes writing time can be just daydreaming, just going for that run to let the blood circulation spark ideas, going to a museum and, enjoying something, or going to watch a movie, and doing stuff. When I was drafting these notes for my war scenes, I watched a whole lot of war movies, because I'm like, okay, I know I have to have a naval battle. I want a naval battle in there. What does that even look like? Right. So I read a lot of books that had naval battle descriptions. I looked at, movies, with naval battles. So I think that we as writers should probably redefine what constitutes writing time. You might not every day sit down and type up some words, but if you are, watching a film or running and thinking about your book or daydreaming, that's writing time too.
Yeah. The problem with writing is, as a vocation, fiction writing in particular, is that it's a very, very complicated activity that people constantly want to simplify down to a soundbite. Yes. And often that soundbite, and if you're like struggling, which, maybe some of your listeners are, and certainly I have, and someone says, look, writing's simple, butt in chair, same time every day. Don't let yourself move until you've written 1,000 words. That sounds really logical to me. That sounds like, hey, how can that possibly fail? Problem is, it fails for me all the time. And the reason it fails is because, people say there's no such thing as writer's block, and then they'll go, yeah, it's not like there's such a thing as plumber's block. Well, there is such a thing as plumber's block. It's called anxiety and depression. Plumbers sometimes suffer from it. And when they do, they have trouble getting out of bed and getting to work too. And so if your anxiety level, because of what you're doing, what you're stuck, if you're just like pushing that through the roof, you're going to hit a point where you're going to just suck all the joy out of it. So you're right. There are these other ways of doing it. There's a really interesting, I think, I don't have the correct name of the book, so I apologize, but there's a famous kind of ad man. I think his name was James West, who was constantly asked, how do you come up with ideas? How do you come up with ideas? And so he actually wrote like a 60-page book, and it was called something like On the Generation of Ideas. And he said, look, it's really simple. There's 5 steps. Step 1, you got to accumulate all the information about whatever it is you want to write about. If you're trying to make an ad for something, you do that. If you're trying to write about, fantasy wars, go accumulate a whole bunch of information. Then you got to make like a serial killer's murder board. You got to like put everything up. You got to surround yourself with all of the imagery and the text of this kind of stuff. And he said, and it gets weirder, because then he goes, then you have to stimulate your emotions. go out and get incredibly drunk and into a bar fight, or go break up with your best friend, or go do something that terrifies you or horrifies you or makes you so ashamed you can't bear yourself. Which seems like the weirdest thing. And he says, then go to sleep. When you wake up, you'll have the ideas will be there. And what's interesting about that to me, I'm not sure that it's I try not to go out and have drunken affairs.
Yeah, as your lawyer, I advise you not to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the connection that he makes that I think is interesting is that, and I think writers sometimes miss, part of the essentials of what we do isn't just information. It's not just research and data that you then translate into ideas. It's your own emotional depth. If you don't go out and have emotional experiences, you're going to have trouble creating drama. And drama is my business, right? That's all I do. I'm never going, what's the coolest thing I can do? What's the most fantasy thing I can do? What's the trope everyone's looking for? I always ask, what's the most dramatic next thing that can happen? But to connect to drama, you have to connect to emotions. And so part of what we do, and it's hard for a lot of writers are sort of like introverts. We like to kind of protect ourselves. You have to go out into that strange world and get scared and get happy and get angry and get sad. So yeah, that's what I like about that. Because in part, it kind of frees me up. It goes, it's not just an intellectual process.
No, it's very much an emotional, creative side. And I do want to say, I'm looking at your background and I see some swords. And I love swords. You can't really tell because I've got my massive master plan over here. But like I have a ton of swords over here. I see a little, what is that kind of gun? It's an old
flintlock.
Love it. I love it.
Yeah. And because I'm in Canada and not in Texas, I don't, Russell can confirm this, but I don't think I'm breaking any state laws when I say I don't actually like guns. You
get put in jail in Texas if you say something like
with
that.
With the new laws in Canada, it's good that you don't.
That's probably true. but my wife's sister's partner loves kind of the old historical guns and things like that. And sometimes and he was kind enough to give me this old flintlock. I keep telling him, hey, find me a wheel lock pistol because those were really cool. But those are kind of harder to find. The wheel lock precedes the flintlock, but it's actually a more sophisticated weapon. And in some ways it was superior to the flintlock. It was just way harder to make, which is why they were replaced with the flintlock, which is a simpler, cheaper weapon. But I used to fence quite a bit. I still sometimes I just did a rapier and longsword intensive that was like 5 days long, 10 hours a week. It was I almost died. We have a great school in Vancouver called Academy Duello that's run by some guys that are they're just brilliant, like really committed, not just to the art of the sword, not just to the history, but to how do you embrace everybody into teaching? How do you help every different body learn to sword fight? Because in the old days, if you needed to fight with the body you had, not the body you wished you had. And so I went and did this intensive with those guys in their class, and I was pretty beat up afterwards, but it's great. I still love the rapier. I still tolerate the long sword. So yeah, swords are, I love them. They're fascinating. And because they always feel like a gateway to lots of interesting stories. There was, when I wrote the second Greatcoats book, which is called Night Shadow, there's this character that appears in Night Shadow called Dariana, who is this terrifyingly dangerous kind of swordswoman and an assassin. And the main character of the Greatcoats is a guy named Falcio. He's one of the Greatcoats. He's one of these traveling justices. And he's a pretty great duelist. But he was a little nervous about her and how fast and skillful she was. And when I wrote that book, I remember seeing, on, I think it was on Reddit, somebody said, I'm just so sick of these authors who they feel like this need to present like women sword fighters who are really skilled, and like that's not how it works, and the bodies just don't work for it. And, women can never be this or that. And I don't think the person was trying to be was trying to be misogynistic, but what was fascinating to me was I was like, I was like, well, okay, who cares, first of all, about averages? Because we're never dealing with average characters in books. We're dealing with people who, for one reason or another, have had to become good at what they do. And, you know, you can talk all day about how men have more muscle mass than women, but, you know, there's not that many men that want to go toe to toe with Ronda Rousey or someone like that, right? They'll just get their
Truth.
So, you know, like, and it's the same here. But the thing that fascinated me was, I had to say, like, the roots of that character, Dariana, was from I reading up on a woman named Ella Hatan, I think it was. And Ella Hatan was an actress from Zanesville, Ohio, in like the 1850s, whose career started going down. She started training in the sword with this famous soldier of fortune named Captain Monstery, I think his name was. And she started doing public duels. She started exhibition duels, and she did duels, and she would take on all comers. And she did these duels, and she won all the time. She started making a fortune. She started traveling the United States, challenging people to duel her, not just in one weapon like saber or rapier, but with knives, on horseback. And she was 5'4", 150 pounds. And she was, at that point in time, probably the finest swordsperson in the entire country. In fact, there were guys who would say, "Oh, you know, it's all fake, it's all staged." So she would go to their town and say, "Okay, let's do it," and they would leave town before she got there.
Wow! Oh my gosh, that's insane! But I mean, just dueling and stuff. I could sit here and I could talk about all day. I've been watching that. Like Great Britain Castles on Netflix. They talk about like swords and all these crazy battles that happen at these castles. And I mean, oh my gosh, I could just go on and on about those forever. I love hearing those stories. But I am the happy person that kicks it off, and I'm the bad guy at the end that has to end our show. But you guys, this has been such an amazing conversation. Sebastien, you're going to have to come back and talk to us. This has been an amazing conversation, and I have absolutely loved it. So I'm going to pass it to Russell for closing statements, then Fern. Russell.
Here's to Fern going to Vancouver for a week of sword lessons. Ooh. I think she should do it. And Sebastien, before you leave, would you tell us one more time where people could find your books?
Yeah, the easiest. So you can find them everywhere. They're in sort of all the major stores and things like that. And they've been translated into 15 languages. So if you happen to want to read about magic and talking squirrel cats in Hebrew, you can do that, or Russian or whatever language you like. But to find me personally, I'm at decastell.com. So it's DECASTELL.com. I'm super easy to find. If you Google me and misspell my name, it'll probably get you somewhere close. And that's where I always, you know, all my books are, and you can kind of find out what I'm generally up to. And yeah, I'd love to see everybody. And thank you all so much for having me. It's really been a pleasure.
It's been amazing. Fern.
I've enjoyed this conversation a lot, and yes, totally up for like going to sword fight. By the way, for my birthday, CJ got me some lessons with long swords, so I'm going to be starting those here. So yes, I am looking forward to that a lot, because yes, I am a sword lover.
Nice. Well, Sebastien, thank you so much for taking time out of your Monday morning to come and talk to us and just let us dive into your author world. I know that's our most favorite part, and it has been such a delight. So thank you so much. Everybody, we hope that you all have a fantastic week, and just stay cool if you're in the hot area. If not, stay warm, dry, whatever season that you are in that you're listening to us. But until next time, you guys, we'll catch you all next Monday. Bye, everybody.